Good morning to everyone who's joined us live today. Good afternoon and good evening as well in some time zones. We have people joining us who've registered from coast to coast and a few from Europe as well. So good evening to those. My name is Nikhil and I head the North American business for Vantage Circle. Vantage Circle is one of the fastest growing platforms globally for holistic employee engagement, from employee rewards and recognition, workplace wellness, benefits, and pulse surveys. Vantage Circle provides an intelligent, unified platform, and they've got close to 2 million active users on their platform today. Now, as a business, people and culture are what we're passionate about, and the experiences of the last 18 months have orchestrated the need to discuss topics that we've often given less importance to. The Be Prepared in VUCA Times webinar series is our attempt to be better prepared. And note that there's a P at the end of the term VUCA. This is something that we've added because we believe that the pandemic has been very different from any other vulnerable or crisis situation that we've encountered. It's been a first for a lot of us, and hopefully nothing we see in the future is as bad. In our fourth episode today, we're being joined by Tracie Sponenberg to talk about the evolving role of HR in building employee resilience in VUCA times. But first, I'd like to introduce Tracie to y'all. Tracie Sponenberg is the Chief People Officer of the Granite Group, based in Concord, New Hampshire. Tracie is a global speaker on HR, leadership, technology, and business issues. She is a co-founder of HR Rebels, DisruptHR, New Hampshire, and HR Rebooted. Also a founding member of Chief Boston and CPOHQ, and an expert council member for the Select Software Reviews. Wow, what an amazing resume. Thank you, Tracie, for joining us today. I couldn't memorize that. I had to read that out.
Thanks, Nikhil. I'm happy to be here. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you so much. So, since we're talking about how life at work has evolved for HR since the pandemic struck, I'd like to trace the events that architected HR roles to change. As an HR leader, Tracie, what kind of employee reactions did you have to deal with in the first 6 months of the pandemic? Let's actually start from there.
It's interesting thinking back. It seems at once like it was yesterday and also about 100 years ago. It seems so long ago. And I remember the day that it really happened for us. It was March 11th, and we were at an in-person meeting, and we formed a war room and a council, and just really thought at that time, boy, it was going to be a couple of weeks. We all do what we need to do, and then we go back to normal. And here we are closing in on a couple of years later, and we're not. And I think the biggest thing I remember from dealing with our people is fear and uncertainty, right? And it speaks right to VUCA in that nobody knew. We were trying to make decisions. We didn't know if they were the right ones. And the best thing that we could think of to do was to crack the lines of communication to our people wide open. We gave out my cell phone. We gave out our CEO's cell phone number. We deployed our entire HR team to essentially, answer questions for our people and really be there to listen in a lot of cases, because everybody was scared and everyone was uncertain, and no one knew. And over time, we developed some processes, and we were able to reassure in certain things. But I remember very clearly thinking in the beginning, is our business going to be here? Are we going to have jobs? Are we going to, have to do layoffs? And none of that came to fruition. Actually, because of the industry we're in, and we're a wholesaler in the plumbing and heating and cooling space, we actually ended up doing quite well because everybody was home working on their houses, and a lot of people ended up moving. So our business did well, but that brought up an additional problem in that once our people weren't quite so fearful, they were overwhelmed with work and very busy. And because we're very aggressive about keeping anybody out of work, we're a physical business for the most part. They were short-staffed a lot because if you sneezed, you couldn't come to work. We were making sure that people were out, where in the past you would just show up and do your job. So once we got over that fear and uncertainty to a degree, that brought up a whole host of other issues.
Absolutely. So, I think the central theme that I have also heard and experienced ourselves in our company was lots of fear and uncertainty. That's what really was the pulse of the workforce, right? Right. And I know you said it was more about at that point just responding to the situation. It was obviously hard to take decisions. It was more about let's absorb, let's listen, let's reassure, right? But what were some of, as an HR team, what were some of the emotions that you encountered amongst employees? What did they come and tell you?
Boy,
I remember. Ask you?
Yeah, I remember very clearly talking to a person in our a gentleman in one of our locations in Vermont who had newborn infants, and early on, just him saying, I don't know if I can come to work because I don't know what I'm going to bring home to my babies. And we had another person who was, and we had a few people, we had another person who was just afraid to come to work, period, afraid to leave the house. And we had lots of other people with childcare issues. And, the emotions, it was almost like going through the stages of grief, I think, because we knew at a certain point that we were never going to go back to life the way it was pre-pandemic. It will get close at some point, but this has fundamentally changed the world of HR. It's fundamentally changed the world of work, and it's fundamentally changed the world, period. So I remember all of these stories, and I think for us and as an HR team, the best thing we could do is to hold space for our people, to listen, to be there, and to do whatever we could. And a lot of that meant taking away the fear around pay. So we were very upfront with making sure that people were being paid to stay home, that they weren't losing all of their vacation time, that, if the situations warranted and they had to be quarantined or couldn't come to work, that they were being paid far before that was a law in some situations. But it was doing a lot of things that I think early in my HR career, I would have thought were not really appropriate because we were learning so much and so many details about people's personal lives that would have been unthinkable a number of years ago.
No, absolutely. And, I think even within HR for a lot of people, that would have changed because if obviously hiring stopped, right? What was the recruitment team doing? How were they pitching into other things? And you did need more people to, respond to so many queries and just to lend them your ears to listen in. You don't anticipate that you would have 100% of employees coming to you with questions and queries and not feeling good about you. Typically, when you do your workforce planning, you would anticipate maybe at any point in time, 20-30% would come to you, but here's 100%. So, and we'll get to that. But just before that, I thought we've got a live audience as well. Let's also throw up a poll and see what they experienced during this time. So I'm just going to throw up a little question here, and everyone can answer this. It would be up on your screens. Should be up now.
I should have added in anxiety, confusion, and frustration because those were certainly things that I think everyone felt, including me.
No, absolutely, and leaders as well. But what we're trying to say is what's that one thing that kind of stood out. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Or what was the first emotion that kind of? I'm sure in some format it was all of them. But was it more anxiety about job, careers? How am I going to pay my bills? How's it going to be? And I know this is largely an audience based in North America, and both the United States and Canada the governments took care of that with, the kind of programs they had for those that went out of jobs. But in a lot of other countries, that wasn't the case, right? So that would definitely be one of them. And in some cases, it was just confusion. I don't know what's happening, or I'm just frustrated. And did it lead to demotivation? Because I think that is more of an end product. Did you, you're still evaluating what's happening, or, did it end in demotivation? And let me stop the poll now. We've got a good number of responses, and I'm just going to end. And the results are going to be up. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty even. So I would like to believe my hypothesis from this is that have we given an option to take multiple choices, they would have selected all in most cases because they're so even. But yeah, I think the confusion and the frustration is, what stood out. My answer, if I had to answer this, would have also been confusion, because there was so much information out there. The media created a mess as well, in my opinion. And you're listening to stories, you're listening to what the government is saying, what your other colleagues are saying, grapevine at work, right? How do you deal with that?
Yeah. And I'm trying to consume all the information that was out there. I remember I was tried to keep my own anxiety at bay by exercising every morning, and I still do that. And I was running on the treadmill one morning, and I remember just crying while I was running on the treadmill because I just was completely overwhelmed with all of the information and had no idea what to do. So those of us working in HR were not only not exempt from any of this, but we were really feeling this, because if we're empathetic, like hopefully we are as HR professionals, you're feeling what your people are feeling.
Absolutely. Right. So that was our poll. I'm just going to stop that. And so did the role of HR change? Of course, we're saying it did. And how? What activities, initiatives saw, greater impetus? Like I mentioned, what were the recruitment teams doing? Right? What were some of the other teams, doing? Did the L&D team had more to do? So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think we touched on this earlier, but the world of HR changed, the world of work changed, and the entire world changed. And I think one of the biggest ways that the world of HR changed was that if companies were not on board with seeing HR as a real strategic partner and seeing HR as part of the business instead of somebody that, deals with compliance in forms, they're embracing that now. Because what a good HR leader could bring to the table were processes and how to get through this. So HR was really tasked with getting through something that nobody had ever really seen before, right? So we were having to figure out how to not only keep our people safe, but help our companies thrive and potentially hire people or let people go or deal with all of these complex emotions. And that fell firmly in the laps of HR professionals. So as we were a year into this, you started to see companies go, well, geez, maybe it's time HR doesn't report to the controller. Maybe we should hire a chief people officer or a chief HR officer, have them report to the CEO and really help the business succeed. And I think we started to see that as it started to get harder to hire people. And that's a huge shift. There are so many openings for HR leaders and HR in general. So I was on another call earlier today and somebody said this, this really is the time for HR. So as HR leaders, as HR professionals, we need to embrace that. But at the same time, a lot of other things changed outside of that, the function becoming much more important. A lot of other things changed. We really got, if we weren't there already, we really got thrust into embracing mental health in the workplace and having these kinds of conversations. We really, really got thrust into making sure that we were leading empathetically, that we were leading authentically, that we were being vulnerable. I think some of the best organizations were out there saying, listen, we don't know what's going on, but we'll be there with you every step of the way. Communication became so incredibly important. And if you were a company that didn't communicate with your people regularly before, that had to change. And if it didn't, you're in trouble. I think this was a time that we went through that your culture either helped you or it really, really, really hurt you, because the companies that thrived through the pandemic were companies like ours that had a great culture in place already. We were able to somehow retain the majority of our people and keep our people as safe as possible and keep our people as engaged as possible and continue to create opportunities for them. And hopefully that still continues. But, there's so much. There's a huge focus, obviously, and equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging over the past year. And that's something that, shamefully, that I hadn't thought much about before a year and a half ago. And a lot of companies hadn't. And that's a whole new way of approaching how we do work for some people. And it shouldn't have been. But that really fundamentally changes how you work. That fundamentally changes your talent structure, and it fundamentally changes your business. So there was a lot that we really had to embrace over the past. I know Pat was on last week and talked much more about that, and she is terrific and far more qualified than I. But that's a very, very important part that we had to.
Well, I think you said something very, very important, which I picked up, which is that the pandemic essentially exposed your company culture, right? It really, right. It was the true surprise test, or litmus test, whatever you want to call it, and not just for companies. I would say for nations as well, right? Policies. Sure. Obviously, policies are driven by cultures. They're driven by values. So policies, values, and overall culture, actually, the true reality showed up. And like you said, those that had a culture where empathy was a core ingredient, in some cases a core value, where DEI was already being practiced, where communication was more open, there was acceptance to mistakes, there was an acceptance to vulnerability. I think all of those aspects, companies that had that culture already, they did okay. I'm not saying they didn't suffer or they didn't have to go through taking tough decisions and having tough conversations, but those that didn't, right? This was really that surprise test that your teacher would give you one fine day. But apart from, obviously these are all areas of organizational behavior or behavioral economics, all linked somewhere to the human mind or the human self or human resources. Yes, these are not things that, I don't even think some of these things are taught in B schools and in HR courses. Yes, but you are aware that these are associated, aligned with the HR function. But what about things that you never thought you had to do? For example, some of my conversations with some of our clients, I'm talking about a large number, so this is a big sample set, was that, hey, we actually got into managing logistics. How do we set up work from home, infrastructure, right? Are we going to use Zoom? Are we going to, that whole infrastructure management and logistics was never part of the HR JD, right?
No. And we actually hired our first head of logistics during this time, as a lot of companies did. not for pandemic logistics, but actually as a kind of an offshoot of that. But yes, logistics, sanitation, doing things like we had our HR assistant out scouring grocery stores for paper towels and cleaners, because we said to we have 50 locations, we said, what do you need? We'll get it for you. And it was, well, we need more toilet paper. We can't source that locally. We need more cleaners. So that is something never, ever, ever would I have imagined. But because we were just so focused on keeping everybody together and not being able to have a clean environment or toilet paper, those are things that are really super important. So we found ourselves doing things that we just never thought, and being involved in facilities and logistics and all of that. That was all very, very new. And probably a lot that I'm forgetting.
Absolutely. I'm sure there was a lot. But are there any specific new roles or titles that, have emerged during these times within HR? And so something that you've implemented?
Yeah. So we brought in a people experience manager, and that's not a completely new title in the world of HR. It's a completely new title in our world. And it's certainly new within our industry as well. And that's somebody that we brought in internally, somebody who did not have a background in HR, but had all of the skills to be able to do the job. And her sole job is to be focused on what that employee experience looks like, what that looks like from when somebody's hired to when they leave and after they leave, and making sure that that is incredible, it's personalized, it's individual. And that's something that 2 years ago, that would never have even have been a thought of being able to bring in somebody in a company like ours to have the luxury of having Monica do that job. But that is definitely something that the pandemic brought on, that, we need somebody to be thinking about this all of the time. We need somebody to be talking to our people all day, every day.
Right. Absolutely. And you also spoke about, embracing mental health. We've heard from a lot of folks. In fact, Enrique also mentioned in our conversation last week that that's another role that he saw. He saw, chief wellness officer coming into being. He hadn't heard much about that. I mean, there might have been, the one-off companies who did have that, but we've started hearing more of these. So, wellness, right? Maybe, recognition. Are those the kind of, areas that you started, focusing more on, and you actually put that on someone's JD and say, this is also something that you've got to do? Well, what were those areas?
So we were focusing on wellness. It's actually part of our people experience manager's role. And she was dipping into that before as part of a committee. But because wellness is such an integral part to our people's experience at our company, that's there. But we don't have a chief wellness officer. That's something that down the road, I think, would be absolutely amazing, because we tended in the past as a company, I think, to think of wellness as, are you physically fit? And we weren't thinking, how is your mental health? We weren't thinking, how is your financial health? We weren't thinking, how is your spiritual health, your community health? And so a few years ago, we actually built a wellness, not a platform really, but we built this 5-tiered wellness program that addressed all of these facets of wellness. And what we're doing now is completely blowing that apart and reinvigorating it, and really trying to get our arms around what that particularly the mental health means, because we are, I don't want to stereotype, but we are largely male, largely made up of people who don't talk about things like that a lot. And we're trying to have those conversations. We're trying to have our first line managers, who are so critically important, have those conversations with their people. We're trying to, as leaders, open up in our own vulnerability. I shared with my leadership team late last year, like in a really personal discussion. My mom died last year in a way that was just in the middle of the pandemic, and I couldn't see her. And it was she was given 2 weeks to live, and she lived for 6 months. And so it was every day waking up and trying to manage. It was in the heart of COVID, that response for my company while dealing with my own pain and grief. It was just awful. And I hadn't told many people. My CEO knew, a few other people knew. So I told my entire leadership team, which is large, and talked about it. And I said, you would never have known if you talked to me unless you asked me. You would never have known by looking at me. And so we need to be talking to our people. We need to be asking these questions, because somebody just might open up to you. And I think that's, you can't see mental health. And so we really need to get to know our people and ask those questions. That's so critical.
No, absolutely. And in fact, Pat shared on our last conversation an exercise that they've started doing when they get into their, review meetings. They spend the first 5-10 minutes just giving everyone an opportunity to talk about what's happening at home, right? Because sometimes what you need to do is you need to indirectly bring out those things. Because, even if you go and say, hey, we're going to ask, sometimes people are so closed that, they're still going to stay shut, right?
Right.
So some people would, welcome the fact that, there's a wellness officer who's going to come and, ask about it. And it has to be personal. You can't just put up a survey and say, how are you feeling? That's right. Absolute nonsense. This has to be personal. And then, like Pat said, they realized that, when they were asking these questions straight up, not everyone was still responding. But when they started, having indirect conversations and finding cues, finding signals, that revealed a lot more, right?
Right.
And you can only act on what you know.
Yeah. And it's like you said, getting to know people, getting to know your people. I've done presentations in the past for nonprofits where, people don't know the names of their people who report to them, their kids, right? Or their spouses. And so that's a pretty simple thing. Most people don't have 100 direct reports. So if you have a handful, you have 10 direct reports, you can probably know their spouse's names or kids' names. You can probably ask about them, and you should, because that's a level of respect. And I think that's just a level of caring that absolutely should be in any kind of business relationship. And if it goes further than that, I think that really depends, but you should know some basic stuff about your people.
Absolutely. In fact, another interesting nugget that was shared with me from one of our oldest clients, who's also a friend now, is that they actually mandated that when they had their Zoom meetings, you had to keep your video on. It's like, I don't care if, you're wearing, half sleeves, or, you're basically in a vest, you haven't combed your hair, your parents are watching TV behind, just mute it. But it's okay, right? Bring us into your homes.
Be who you are.
Be who you are and bring us into your homes, right? Your family is an extended family to us. It's just a small statement. It's just the way you say it, right? And makes you feel good, right? Yeah. Because a lot of people, they would just switch up their video, come on. Some would do it, some wouldn't. And then those that are doing it, they start feeling, hey, why am I doing it, right? So, yeah. I'm going to throw up our next poll and ask exactly the same question. What people and culture programs and initiatives gain impetus at your organizations post-pandemic? And it should be on your screens now. And this time you can answer multiple choices. So was it employee wellness that gained impetus? Was it recognition and feedback? That's another thing that we've seen has gained a lot. Was it learning and development? OD. And, even on learning and development, Tracie, I'm going to come to you with this question. Yeah. Has the construct of learning and development changed? Not only what, the way in which it's being delivered, because obviously there's no classroom instructor-led training now, right? It's all virtual. And then there's this whole notion about, people being overloaded with webinars and virtual content. So Has that changed the way you deliver, but also the content? I saw a lot of clients doing, a lot of companies, I keep saying clients, but a lot of companies actually coming up with L&D programs just to teach people how to, use Zoom or some of these tools better. Never thought you would need to do that.
Yeah. I think we're seeing all kinds of things. And one thing that I heard that was pretty funny, I think we have to be careful for learning's sake. One thing that I heard, a local company had a meeting and a learning session on how not to have as many meetings. And, that's that you have to be mindful of. This meeting could have probably been an email. But I think what we're trying to do, and this is something, again, that arose out of the pandemic, we're trying to completely redesign what learning looks like. And we're trying to co-design with our own people. And I think that's something that's been a real switch that we've seen in the world of work over the past year and a half. Is there's a lot of opportunities now to co-design things, including learning with your people. So not everybody learns in the same way. I, for one, am so tired of Zoom meetings but that's the world we live in, right? And so I learn by reading, and I learn by watching, but in shorter bites. So we're trying to get our arms around, one of the cool things that I've heard is we have warehouses. You can put QR codes on boxes, and somebody can scan that and learn in 30 seconds a little piece of information. And then maybe 10 minutes later, they learn another 10 seconds of information. And so we're trying to figure out how to deliver that. But it's meeting people where they are and really having lots of different forms of learning, because not everybody learns in the same way.
Absolutely. Learning styles are so different and they keep changing. I think, even when I look at myself when I was in university, until unless I wrote down notes, I almost created a replica of those textbooks. I couldn't, really register. And now I can just, read off a Kindle and I don't make notes. So I think learning styles are also changing with time. But on your screen, you can see what everyone's answered. Employee wellness is the one that stands out, followed with recognition, OD, organizational redesign, and then learning and development. I thought learning and development might have been higher, but I think this is what a lot of companies have seen investment into. And we spoke about, what are those emotions? If they were confusion and frustration and anxiety, then obviously mental wellness ought to have been something that was being focused on. There's a comment I want to take from one of our participants, which is there should have been another option, which is none of the above or only technology, not HR's responsibility, but that was where all the focus went in my company. I think that's a brilliant point. And, that's it basically sums up the fact why we're talking about the changing role of HR, right? And let's talk more about this, Tracie. How tech savvy or have HR teams been in the past? The expectation has changed. How are we dealing with that? But also, Michelle, to answer your question, some of these options that we've given here to choose from, all of them need technology as a driver. Because if you don't have technology to back employee wellness, you're not going to be able to effectively, run those programs. Recognition and feedback, again, if you don't have technologies, if you don't have, the right apps and softwares that make sure it's real time basically the analytics, the insights, the artificial intelligence, I think all of them are the backbone, but great point. While all of these need technology to be the driver, but in general, Tracie, did you need to learn new technologies? And as an HR team, was there a resistance to it, or was there an acceptance to it?
So I look at technology right now as something that any HR team should already be proficient in, because I think that was the skill of a few years ago where that was kind of the emerging thing. So I certainly had a long evolution toward technology myself, but how I view technology and how I think a lot of folks in my position view it is it's a tool. And it's a great tool to allow you to automate the things that can be automated. For example, if you don't have technology to automate your benefits enrollment process, you're missing a huge opportunity because you're just doing manual work that's taking away from that incredible strategic, important work or working with your people. So I've been at the Granite Group for about 6 years. About 4 or 5 years ago, we completed a process of completely overhauling our technology and automating everything that we could to allow our people the tools to do a lot of things themselves, to take a lot of the work out of the hands of managers who were having to help new hires fill out 51 pages of new hire paper, and to just allow us to focus on the things that we need to focus on. Now, we're twice as big as we were since then. So we're going through that whole process again and making sure, and technology changes, but it's a tool, and it's a tool to supplement the work that you're doing. And it's not a replacement for people, and it's not a replacement for things, but it allows us to have that availability to spend an hour, or one of our people on our team will spend an hour with a new hire explaining their benefits instead of just saying, here, you read this and sign up for this. So during open enrollment, same type of thing. We can take the time to do that incredibly important work of helping walk somebody through their whole total rewards package. And that's how we've chosen to use technology.
Oh, absolutely. And even if I pick onto some of the points that we have on the screen, right? You look at employee wellness, right? It's technology and the artificial intelligence, which would actually help giving you those signals. Because while I gave you an example of how Pat says she used these ice-breaking moments to talk about family and life and unearth some of those signals, but you can't always do that, right? You can't do it org-wide, and so that's where I think technology would come in, which would use maybe pulse surveys built in, and some of these initiatives to actually give you those signals. And again, even for recognition and feedback, I think we're not wired. That's what I've started to believe as humans. We're not wired to both give and take feedback and recognition naturally, right? But this is where technology comes in to give you those nudges and help you realize that this is the moment, and this is when you should do it, and this is how you should do it. So, absolutely. There's another question that's coming that I want to take, which is, with the increasing role of HR in an organization, do you believe more companies should have a CHRO to help guide an organization? And this is, of course, assuming there are still a lot of companies that don't have that CHRO role.
Every company should have that position. Let me say this. Every company, probably over 50 people, and every company should have that position reporting to the CEO. Now, if that 50-person company is going to stay 50 people forever, maybe not, but maybe you do have a CHRO who is a department of one. But absolutely. So I talk about this a lot because I'm really, really passionate about this. And I've talked with a lot of my friends who are not in as fortunate of a position as I am. I have an incredible CEO who truly leads people first and truly has the heart of our people at everything that he does. So if you have a CFO, you should have a CHRO, a CPO. If you have other members of the C-suite leading other areas of the business, you should have a CHRO. Absolutely. That's far less common than it should be.
Right. And in fact, with the increased responsibility and the evolving role and the kind of things that the CHROs and the HRs, and let's talk about slightly larger firms, right? Maybe a 500 employee plus kind of a firm where CHROs roles have evolved even more. They've become more important. And I think even if you go beyond 2,000 employees, the larger it is, the complexities are more, right?
Sure.
Is this now the time, or has the time now come for CHROs to be looked as successors to the CEO's post? Because traditionally, we've seen sales heads, we've seen, chief marketing officers, chief sales officers, chief operating officers, even CFOs become CEOs. Yeah. We haven't seen too many CHROs become CEOs, but could this be the time?
And it does happen. And yes, I think this is an incredible time. And I think as we move forward in the world of work, the skills and competencies that are needed for CHROs are increasingly centered around business and around people. And as we move forward in the world of work, the priorities of the CEO certainly are centered around business, but are also centered around people. So I think this is an excellent time. It's funny, I don't think I've talked about this publicly before, but many years ago, in my first role leading HR, I had an opportunity to step into a role as CEO. And I turned it down, and CEO of a small offshoot of the organization. And I often wondered about what the trajectory of my career would have been had I done that. And I think my path isn't necessarily to that, but I think my path could be to that. I think that I've developed the skills over the years, and I think a lot of my peers doing the same work have those skills. And I certainly hope we see more CHROs leading companies and not just leading HR functions.
Absolutely. And what I wanted to ask you next, and I'm just putting this out for everyone to see, because this is something I came across. We didn't specifically, touch upon resilience, but I wanted to, just dive into this, right? Recent publication, very recent by Gartner, post-pandemic, of course. And they made a statement which really kind of, stuck onto me. They said that stop designing for efficiency, design for resilience. And the first question that came to mind is, how does one design for resilience?
Yeah, and I think designing for efficiency was something that I really grew up doing. And even in my current company, that's really something we got efficient with the technology so we could do other things and then just get busier. And we've really shifted, particularly in the past couple of years, to try to build not only resilient people, but resilient companies. And it's very complex. I think there's a lot that goes into that. But I think if you start with a company that has a foundation of trust, if you lead with trust, and so many companies do not do that. If you trust your people, you're starting with that foundation. If you empower your people, you're starting with that foundation. My CEO says this all the time, and I actually learned how to trust from him, how to do it this way. He said, you have 100% of my trust initially. You always have 100% of my trust, or you have none. So he freely and openly trusts everybody unless they break that trust. And then, he's done, which that's a whole other discussion. But I had always approached it as earning trust. So I think and I expect to earn trust, and I still expect to earn trust, but now I give trust freely. And I think if we do that as an organization, if we empower our people to make decisions, if we have a culture that embraces failure and mistakes as a learning tool, if we create a culture that has a sense of community, if they have a sense of relationships, they understand how to build relationships and that power that comes into that. And then if we are really truly investing in the whole person, including investing in their mental health, where we're embracing people as whole people instead of bodies in the workforce, which I've heard used, instead of human capital, instead of even human resources, if we're truly embracing the whole person, I think that can go a long way toward building not only resilient people, but resilient organizations.
No, I think that's fantastic. Leading with trust and a culture that accepts failure. I think that's what basically would tell you that we have your back. And if you know that, right, if you know that someone's got your back, then that fear is that you're more resilient. Like, I can take this on, right? Because I'm not alone. And maybe that's another, I'm not alone. That's another statement that needs to be made.
We're a very team-based environment. So all of our individual locations are relatively small. And if you go around and talk to them, like, our team is, what's the thing you like the most? Our people. our team is great. I don't think it's like this throughout the whole company. Well, yeah, it is like this through the whole company. That comes from the top and then set and fostered throughout. But that sense of, like you said, we have your back, can really, really help toward that creating and designing for resilience.
Wonderful. And is this something that you're investing time as an initiative in your company? Is this something that you recommend? And what else do you recommend in addition to that? So I actually want to ask you, what kind of skills and competency requirements do you see in HR teams that you would want to build and be hired for in the next 2022? And possibly what I'm thinking we'll do this time is let's ask this question to our audience first, and then maybe we can take that on.
Great.
So I'm just going to throw up. This is the last poll for today, and this would help our discussion. Let's just look at what responses we get in. What new skills, competencies, or topics would HR teams need to learn in order to be better equipped to handling COVID-like crisis in the future? And when I say the future, I'm talking about 2022, like the near future, the new year that's coming. And we've started to get in some responses. I, of course, have the fortune to see the responses coming in, so I can see the trends moving. So let's give this another maybe 10, 15 seconds. We're still getting in more responses. Analytical ability to leverage technology and AI to proact organizational behavior of today's workforce and its changing demographic composition. Design thinking to build teams, practices, org structures while balancing innovation and compliance, and empathetic communication to build trust and manage crisis. So, I think these options have covered a lot of the things that we've spoken about. So, trust is there, design thinking, technology, and I am going to stop end the poll now. And I'm going to throw the results on your screen. And wow, 85% of our responses say what they would like to see in the new year in terms of skills, competencies, and topics being discussed is empathetic communication or trust to build and manage crisis. Are we then saying that this is a missing piece of the puzzle for today's workforce?
Yeah, it's funny. I think that HR professionals stereotypically are empathetic, and it's something that I've had to work on and build. And one of the things I talk about with my team all the time is always lead with empathy. So I think there's a difference between being empathetic and then putting that into practice in the work. So if we have a decision to make, we're running that through a lens of lead with empathy, right? Lead with empathy. And that can go a long way toward, it's particularly when you're communicating to building trust and to helping you through a crisis. And I think that is maybe something we're good at, but maybe we're not good at putting it into practice. And that's really critical. And design thinking, I think we touched on that before we started this conversation. And I'm sure I haven't seen Enrique's chat yet, but I'm sure he probably touched on that because I know he's a big believer in design thinking. And that's a concept that we've introduced into our HR team, which is a new concept for most people. Design thinking and agile thinking, and these concepts that were born out of world other than the plumbing and heating and cooling world. But these concepts, when taken in, even if you're not going through a full exercise of design thinking or you're not fully becoming agile, taking those concepts in can really help change your department and change your organization and help the organization grow through its people.
Yeah, and even, if you look at, how do you inject empathy into your organizational culture, right? To create those programs, to create those frameworks and initiatives, you need design thinking, right?
Right.
And that, I believe, is definitely that's a missing skill. We're not taught that in HR school on how to do that, and leave alone crisis. Just how do you create programs? I mean, the whole science behind when and how to use benchmarking. Where to bring in gamification. These are all concepts that are very recent, but they're all critical to designing programs and designing frameworks. That's what would make it effective.
I think one of the things we haven't touched on that I think is very relevant to all of this is adopting a growth mindset. I was very firmly in a fixed mindset for years and years and years. And when you adopt a growth mindset, these things don't necessarily become easy, but you get out of your comfort zone, you push yourself to continuously learn. So I know so many HR professionals who are stuck in how they learned, and that was me for a number of years, how they learned initially. But this is very much a discipline where things are changing every single day, and having that growth mindset and developing that will help make these things not easy, but easier.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ask our audience if there are any other questions that they have. I did share the results, right? I did, yeah.
You did.
So are there any questions that anyone has for Tracie and me? Otherwise, what I would want to do is actually now assimilate. We've spoken about so many things. I want to assimilate some of the takeaways. And I want to talk about what are those key, maybe 3 or 4 top takeaways.
Right.
So, are there any questions coming in? And you can ask questions on the chat that you have, just like you have been through our discussion. Thank you so much, Tracie, for all the nuggets of wisdom. I've enjoyed this conversation, and here are some of the things that I, picked up, right from the beginning of the conversation, that there's lots of fear and uncertainty. That was the pulse of the workforce, right? And it all kind of ties down. So that, for example, leads to the importance of embracing mental health. Mental wealth, mental health, they're pretty synonymous. And also the emergence of the CHRO role. So while we've spoken about the HR role as a whole, but very specifically, you said HR leader there. Big shout out for companies that have, let's say, 50 to 100 employees and still don't have an HR role. They still have just, an HR manager or an admin manager or someone who's coming in and doing both those roles. It's time you thought about this. For some of the larger companies, how about a wellness officer? You don't need to have a chief wellness officer, but how about someone dedicated to wellness? How about someone dedicated to employee experience? And what would that, employee experience role be, right? Essentially, for me, understanding, the whole workflow, the process across an employee's life cycle, right from when he joins, the onboarding experience, his or her first promotion, things like those, and right up till their exit, right? Everything that they experience, right? And this is where a lot of tools and technology would come into place. Pulse tools, for example, greatly effective to really know in real time, what's happening, where's the experience falling short. But then also doing both internal and external benchmarking to know what it is. So that's my view on what that chief experience officer or just experience officer would do. And also we said that from a CHRO's perspective, I think it's just brought a lot of focus back on culture because, if anything, the pandemic has definitely exposed your company culture. Right. And by the way, just on that point, I wanted to share that a couple of folks that I spoke with actually mentioned that they've had to change their value system or their company values in the last 18 months. I don't have a lot of data, but is this something you've heard or is this something that you feel like, I can understand why that would have happened?
It's funny. I talked with a friend, Deborah Corey, about a year ago about this, about changing values. And I think she said, don't change your values unless your business is fundamentally changed. So I don't know the companies, but I would suspect that maybe a good thing, that maybe they took a look at their values and went, this doesn't really represent who we want to be now in this, VUCA world. This doesn't represent who we need to be. So I'm going to imagine that that's a good thing. I think that changing them too often can be problematic, but I think maybe they looked at themselves and went, you know what, we need to be better.
No, absolutely. And sometimes it's not drastically changing, but also rephrasing, so, and I want to talk about one example here. And this is actually a Southeast Asian bank, which introduced a new value. And you won't find that term in the dictionary. It's called carefrontational, right? Confront, challenge the status quo, but with care. And that care, and you know where that care is coming from, right? The empathy, the emotions that everyone's going through. But we're still saying that if you don't ask, we have to be more innovative if we have to be prepared for another situation like that. So we have to be more innovative. But we've also, obviously, that caring aspect has to be there. So they coined this term called carefrontational, and I was absolutely blown away. I said, that is amazing.
I love it. It's kind of like a Kim Scott's radical candor and having these discussions and sharing open, honest feedback, but in a caring way. That's interesting.
In a caring way. Absolutely. And what else? A few more takeaways. Obviously, what our poll revealed is that, wellness, org design, recognition, these were some of the more areas that they would want to see companies invest in, their companies invest in. And obviously, we need technology to drive and automate all of them. In fact, all the more in these times where we've had to do so much thinking, right? It's kind of brought to attention the importance of technology automation from an aspect that if this can free your times, right, that's when you can respond to so many people, because this response cannot be robotic.
Right.
Right. And we do have one question that's come in, which is, so the question is, what is the first thing to do towards implementing a resilience-based organization or making an agile organization if a company wants to adopt such policies? Do we need a separate team to implement it internally or any external hiring?
So I think if you really want to become an agile organization, I think that is a process. And I think that is a process that's best led by an agile coach, somebody that's trained and certified, because if you want to truly be agile rather than just embrace the principles, you definitely should. A resilient organization, I don't think that that's easy, but I think that that's something that, could certainly be done with a consultant, but could be done on its own too. But I think that's also something that you really need to define first what that looks like to you. You have to go through that process in defining what that looks like to you and what you want those outcomes to be. But definitely going agile, that's something I would highly recommend a partner for.
Thanks for that response, Tracie. That answered the question. So once again, I wanted to thank you, Tracie. This has been an amazing conversation, very close to our hearts because, some of the topics that we even spoke about and touched upon, the importance of wellness, the importance of recognition learning. These are all things that are important to us. This is what our business is about. And we use technology to better manage some of these programs. There's a QR code that's up there. If you want to know more, just scan this. There's a lot more content up there. We've got a massive library of content across all these relevant topics. A copy of this video would also be there. Answers to all the poll questions is something that we would also be sharing with everyone. And we'll look forward to your feedback and join us for our 5th episode. This one is coming up on November the 24th, which is actually Thanksgiving. So, you can bring your family as well. So, feel free to join in. It's lunchtime, so bring your family. Leanne is a wonderful person, and bring your family and the Thanksgiving turkey. Just so we can share it now.
That's a great topic.
So thank you once again, Tracie, and we will definitely talk more. Probably get Enrique and you and I, all three of us together. That would be a nice conversation.
That would be so fun. Well, thank you so much, Nikhil, and thank you to Vantage Circle. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. All righty, so I'm going to stop the webinar. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
I wasn't sure if I should leave, but goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.